More than 4 million chickens will have to be killed after Iowa state officials say they detected bird flu at an egg farm. Already, more than 90 million birds have been killed since the outbreak started in 2022. The Department of Agriculture claims the risk to the public remains low.
The latest bird flu outbreak has affected more than 60 dairy herds since late March, according to the CDC. Public health officials say they're testing vaccines in case they're needed. Fox's Jonathan Seri has more.
As bird flu spreads among cattle herds, the CDC says it's preparing for a possible increased risk to human health from the virus. Though doctors caution there is still no evidence of person-to-person transmission in the U.S.
It's a very similar virus, but it doesn't seem to attach as well to human cells, which is why it's thought to be a fairly low risk.
The CDC says bird flu has affected herds in nearly a dozen states as of last week. On Friday, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced the virus had been detected in beef tissue from a sick dairy cow, but says the meat did not enter the nation's food supply. So far, only 2 farm workers have tested positive for bird flu this year, one in Texas, another in Michigan. Both had contact with infected animals.
We have specific guidance for those who work on farms in terms of personal protective equipment and how to be safe, how to monitor for symptoms, what to do if they develop symptoms.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is taking steps to develop or acquire vaccines that could be used to protect at-risk workers. Last week, public health officials said they are filling about 4.8 million doses of bird flu vaccine into vials through a national stockpile in case they are needed.
We're really prepared to not only test the current vaccines that we have in the stockpile, but also to really develop specific vaccines. So I think we're in a very good place.
The U.S. is also reportedly in talks with Pfizer and Moderna about developing potential vaccines to reduce the threat of a pandemic. In Atlanta, Jonathan Seri, Fox News.
Welcome, everybody, to the Wake Up Call channel. As you heard, 4.2 million chickens are being euthanized because of the bird flu. This is a common theme that we've heard over the last couple of years now, that many farmers are forced to put down their chickens, and many farmers are now going to be forced to put down their cattle. Unless there's a solution to the problem that they're creating. The solution, of course, is another magic potion. Now, the magic potion that's going to come out isn't necessarily going to be specifically for us. That's what you need to understand. Everybody's looking over in Geneva. Everybody's looking at the World Health Assembly and the pandemic treaty, what I've been talking about, and they're waiting for the green light so that the government could give our full control over to the World Health Organization. But what they're not paying attention to is stories that are coming out little by little about the United States nearing a deal to fund Moderna's bird flu magic potion. It's very important to understand this. Understand the wording of all this stuff, okay? They are trying to get something inside your body. A lot of people said, no, we will not let you put that in our bodies. A lot of sheeple did allow the government to do that. But they want to get it in everyone. And they watch the data and they see how many people they're not going to be able to convince into doing this. So, while they'll release a magic potion that humans will be able to get to prevent themselves from getting the bird flu, which sounds utterly insane because it is, there will be suckers who continually put this inside of them who will line up for bird flu. That's right. Humans will line up for bird flu shots. That's how crazy it is. But that's not what the goal of this is. The goal of this is to get gene editing CRISPR into the food supply chain. And I'm not talking about, okay, they dump graphene oxide on us from the sky. They poison our food, right? We're not talking about worrying about what's inside our Purdue chickens or our McDonald's McNuggets, which is more like human flesh, or Chick-fil-A's fake chicken as well. We're talking about local farmers. We're talking about you and me. Some of you out there might have chickens in your backyard. So when they're talking about them coming out with a bird flu vax, this will be something that's mandated to get into our chicken supply and our cattle supply. So in other words, all sources of meat and food will have this in them. Now, if you're not familiar with how CRISPR works, it can be transferred from the chicken into the chicken eggs. Thus, you eat a chicken egg, you eat a chicken that's already gotten this mandated potion, it's going into your body. Let me show you a rundown on what CRISPR is, and then we'll talk more about what's coming from this.
CRISPR is amazing because it allows us to precisely edit the DNA in living organisms, including in people and plants. With CRISPR, we can change, remove, or replace the genes that govern the function of cells. This means that we now have the ability to use CRISPR like a word processor to find, cut, and paste text.
In 2011, scientists created glow-in-the-dark cats. The researchers took a gene from glowing jellyfish and inserted it into the unfertilized eggs of house cats. It was a neat trick, but they had a bigger goal in mind. They also made the cats more likely to be resistant to a feline form of AIDS by, again, manipulating their DNA. And cats aren't that different than humans. In fact, we share around 90% of our DNA with them. So why can't we engineer humans in the same way? Well, we can. Engineer ourselves to be resistant to life-threatening illnesses, that is. In fact, one scientist claims that he's genetically engineered 2 babies using a revolutionary tool called CRISPR. But what exactly is a CRISPR baby anyway? Would you like to be 6 feet tall? Or never bald? The secret to traits like these lies in the 6 billion letters of your genetic code. But there can be something else in there as well. Mutations. Genetic mutations are linked to at least 6,000 medical conditions, from sickle cell anemia to Huntington's disease. But what if you could make those mutations simply disappear? That's where the gene editing tool CRISPR comes in. CRISPR is made from specialized proteins and other compounds found in certain bacteria. Normally, these proteins protect the bacteria by destroying enemy invaders like viruses. But the inventors of CRISPR figured out how to turn those proteins against genetic mutations and other genes linked to disease. First, they give the proteins coordinates of the wanted gene. Then, CRISPR runs a seek and destroy function. After that, other molecules are dispatched to repair the gene with new, healthy DNA. And just like that, you can edit the human genome. But while the edits may be quick, their changes can last for centuries, especially if you're editing the DNA in an embryo. Embryos start out with a single cell that eventually replicates into millions and then trillions more. So if you alter that initial cell first, you're manipulating the ingredients for every cell that follows later in life. And those same altered cells can be passed on from generation to generation. That's one reason why most experiments on human embryos haven't left the lab. That is, except for the work of Dr. He Jiankui. He claims to have used CRISPR to target and knock out the CCR5 gene in human embryos, which is linked to HIV infection. And then he did something that shocked the scientific community. He implanted the embryos into several women, one of whom gave birth to genetically modified twins. Resistance to HIV aside, most scientists say the procedure was too risky. At least 2 studies suggest that edited cells might actually trigger cancer. And another found that CRISPR can accidentally take aim at healthy DNA. So while CRISPR could make us immune to disease, who knows what else we might get on the side? He implanted the embryos into several women, one of whom gave birth to genetically modified twins.
A lot of things worry me about this because what we're seeing is discussion, because most people are staring and waiting for Disease X to be announced and the government to come out and say, hey, everybody's got to lock themselves up again, everybody's got to do this, and we all should be looking at it because it is coming again. So most people are thinking that the bird flu is what the government's going to use as the next pandemic. But what we're not paying attention to is how the government is going to come in here and they're going to tell us that they're going to save our chicken supply. They're going to save our cattle supply. Well, we're looking for them to do stories like this where we say, well, they're going to wipe off our food supply. Well, they are doing that in a sense. They are wiping off our food supply. They have been for years now. People are going to see stories like that and the government's going to go, no, we don't want to euthanize your chickens anymore. We want to just make sure that the bird flu doesn't spread. So what we'll have to do is vaccinate the chickens and we'll have to vaccinate the cattle. And most people will just go, oh, okay. Well, they're going to vaccinate the chicken and the cattle because they don't understand how gene editing works. Remember Claus. Remember all of these guys, these psychopaths telling us that gene editing is going to change us. Gene editing is what these shots are. Gene editing, right? So when Klaus Schwab says things like this, or all these psychopaths say things like this.
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, right. Just as an example, it's you who are changed. And of course, this has a big impact on your identity.
Yeah. And offers certain kinds of possibilities that have to be careful about. You know, when you began to do that kind of gene editing, some people worry that you are changing what it means to be human.
That's the problem. And of course, the new industrial revolution offers us many opportunities, but it raises manifold questions on the ethical, but even legal implications. And we have to be prepared for it, and that's what we want to do in Davos next year. So this fourth industrial revolution is, it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, right. Just as an example, it's you who are changed.
What they're telling you is that they're going to change you one way or the other. Most people out there look at it and they say, well, I'm not going to put it in my body. I don't really care. But you're not going to realize that it's in your food supply. You're not going to realize it. When you're trying to grow stuff in your backyard and you say, I'm going to be independent of the government, I'm going to grow my own stuff, they're not going to let you do that. I already talked about how they were making and trying to make mandates of people having to register their farming in their backyard with the government. Telling you if you have, you're growing 10 tomatoes in your backyard, well, you got to register this with your community. It's community garden. And people are like, oh, okay, I'll register. They don't even realize this is all going to be documented for a grid shutdown, that the stuff that you think that you're growing for yourself is not going to be yours anymore. They're going to come and they're going to take it. And they're going to say, well, we're going to give it to the rest of the community. For those of you who think that we're going to be able to grow chickens or grow eggs on our own, if you have some in your backyard, this is their way to make sure that they have control over that you're not going to get away from them getting any of these things like CRISPR inside of your body. They're going to make it so that when this is announced, when they say that there's a potion, when they put more stories out there about the spread of this, how it's spreading from chickens to the guy across the street who has cattle, to the guy who's helping on the farmhand who now has it, human, cattle, all these things. They're going to say, look, we have to put something in place to make sure that all of these animals have this vaccine, the cattle specifically and the chickens. So if you're doing it independently on your own, guess what? We're coming to your door and we're going to make sure that it's inside your chicken or your cattle, or we're going to euthanize all of it. We're going to put down all your chickens. We're going to put down all your cattle, and you won't have any say in this. Those are the stories that are happening right now. They're talking about euthanizing the chickens, right? Problem, reaction, solution, right? What's the reaction everyone's having? They're killing our food supply off. They're trying to get us afraid of a flu for chickens. And people are afraid, yes. But what people aren't paying attention to is that this shot is transmissible from a chicken, from an egg of a chicken, or from a piece of steak or a hamburger into our bodies. That's what they're doing. That's what gene editing is. I think way too many people out there with the outbreak were looking around saying to themselves, well, they're trying to depopulate and kill us. Well, of course there's truth to that, but they're also trying to get gene editing inside your bodies, all of our bodies. So this is the next step that they're going to take. They're going to make announcements little by little of more of this spreading, more euthanization. Our supply chain's going down. So people like us are supposed to go, well, we gotta make sure that this doesn't spread. We gotta make sure they don't kill off our food supply. Well, here's the solution. We're gonna give you a magic potion to make sure your chickens don't spread anymore, so we won't have to kill off your food supply. And some people out there won't even understand that. And they'll go, well, fine. They're not trying to get it in me. They're just trying to get it in my chicken. They don't realize that it's transmissible once it's inside of that chicken, once it's inside of that cow, whether it's the milk of the cow, whether it's transmissible. The gene editing can be done that way. So this is something that most people out there aren't paying attention to, that they need to pay attention to in regards to the bird flu. Watch the stories that come out about mRNA, Moderna, whoever decides to release it, and start telling people so they understand CRISPR. Like that video tells you. What does it say specifically? It's a system that allows scientists to add, remove, or change specific genetic information within the body. And then when that woman gives birth to the children, guess what? It passes on through the children. Just like a chicken, it's going to pass on into the egg. And then guess what? All these eggs are going to be in circulation that people like me and you think are organic eggs, or they're eggs that we grow ourselves. And they're going to come and they're going to make sure that you're not doing this without them getting that inside your body. You're not going to be able to farm independently. You're not going to be able to have poultry without having that inside of the chicken. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless all of you, as always, and your families.